Most of them failed because we were still inventing how to do it, but we began to pick and select crops that gave the best return for us. And that's where these plants lost all of their ability to survive in the wild. And then we had to nurture them. They were like our children. But you could put it in another way, too. It's because they gave us something, namely our food, they made us take care of them. So in a sense, they trapped us. Mm-hmm. They captured the human species and said, from now on, we own you. And in order for you to survive, you're going to have to take real good care of us. And the next thing you know, we've got all of these crops that don't look anything like the wild ones. Corn doesn't look like wild corn. Apples don't look like wild apples. And we modified all of them by simply picking out the ones that we thought offered the most advantage for us. Now, that's still genetic modification, okay? Mm-hmm. We're still manipulating the genomes of those animals and plants by selecting the ones that we like rather than the ones that are best for nature. So everything we eat and everything that is slaughtered for food in terms of meat are from, unless it's wild-caught tuna or something like that. But I'm talking about chickens and ducks and geese and even shrimp now and mollusks of various kinds. Those can all be grown in farm-like conditions. And if you were to release these animals back into nature, they wouldn't survive a day. They wouldn't know how. So those are all modified organisms. Now, recently, we've acquired the ability to speed that process up by taking those animals and plants into the laboratory and manipulating them faster to get to places other than where we are currently. So one of the good uses, I can say that there's nothing bad or good about technology. It's how you use it. That's how it's bad, So if you manipulated a genetics of a plant to produce a plant that gave you more nutrition, could you be against that in places where this nutrition is so marginal that if you don't eat 3 or 4 different kinds of plants, you can't get a balanced meal? Now, I can make that all happen into one meal if I do this in rice, for instance, and that's actually been done. So if you eat that rice, you only have to eat rice now instead of rice, beans, and let's say tomatoes. In some places, all they have to eat is rice. So genetically manipulating that rice plant to produce more nutrition, I think, is a peaceful use of genetics. But if you manipulate the genetics of the plant so that someone has to use a higher level of fertilizer to get it to grow, or more herbicides to keep the weeds away, and it's the same company that makes the herbicide and the weed killers and the pesticides, then that's a horrible use of genetics. And those are the kinds of uses that I'm dead against. I'm really, I would like to see that stopped, but of course, one voice in the wilderness isn't going to make much of a difference here. So another approach is to do it yourself and to avoid using anything that they do in that sense.
I think that our technological ideologies have filtered over, if you will, into a space that I guess the alchemy has been flipped on its head for exacerbation, if you will, because in Western culture we exacerbate everything. More is better, if you will, and it is actually devolved us. This is just from my perspective, because I think in metaphysical, spiritual terms, devolved us as a human species to an extent, because it has pulled us away from nature, being observers of nature, and not fighting against nature, but coexisting with it.
Yeah, right.
So, one of the things that I love about this vertical farming project is that it re-equilibrates us, the human being, with our food source, because it will make us more aware. It gives us back our humanity, if you will. And technologically, technology is a wonderful thing, but I think as the technological industrial age came about and, running the race and all of these things, that has actually worked against us and not for us, and actually devolved us in a lot of ways. So where now nature has become an enemy and not a friend.
Well, no question about that. I actually have a slide that shows back in the 1930s, Buckminster Fuller proposed to put domes over the cities, believe it or not, to protect the cities from all the pollution that we've caused by building the cities. Does that make any sense? Here we are using this technology to advance our civilization, and then we find out at the very end that we've actually spoiled everything, and we have no choice but what to barrier ourselves between nature and us. And that's what a city wall is all about, and that's what windows are about. And I totally agree with you. So today, if you go to a place called the Eden Project, which has a great name associated with it, I don't know if you're familiar with it or not, Di, but it's in Cornwall, England. And all you have to do is type out Eden Project, and you'll see what they did. They created these massive domes that are transparent, and inside they have rescued all of these endangered tropical plants from around the world where encroachment is threatening their very existence. And they've taken some seeds and they've planted them in a nursery somewhere in England, and then they've taken those little plantings and put them inside this Eden Project, and they're doing fantastically well because, of course, we're not doing anything to them. We're letting them live their lives without encroaching into their world. We've created this micro world for them in hopes that someday their wild world will recover enough so that we can reintroduce them. Now, the threat here is, of course, that these plants will lose their ability to go back to nature, and then we'll be stuck having to take care of them. So we have to be careful of how we use our technologies, because there's lots of unintended consequences that can result from this. And I accept the fact that I know your listeners are sitting there with smirks on their faces saying, listen to this guy. He's just come up with a technology for growing food inside of a city, and he's saying be careful of technology. You have to be careful of it because it can come back to haunt you in ways that you don't perceive to begin with, right? So here we have the best virtue of what I think our students and I have done is to identify a way of, if we grow food in this building, and as unsatisfactory as that might appeal to some of the consumers, for every indoor acre of farmland, you can generate over 10 acres of outdoor land that you no longer have to farm. So that's the key. Okay, I don't necessarily approve of the way you're making my food, but now I don't have to get on an airplane to travel to South America to see wildlife, because Ohio, now that they're no longer farming there, the hardwood forests grew back, and I can take eco-tours in places like Youngstown, which used to be a horrible industrial center, and now look at it, all these trees have come back and nature's come back, and it was just hiding. It was always there, but in little fragments. If you allow the whole thing to seamlessly come back together while you're not looking, you'll end up with a beautiful planet again, and you will have your food at the same time.
Indeed, and it also, from a local standpoint, it will enable a better sense of community. It will strengthen the local economy, because
Absolutely.
Now you have individuals in different communities, the Upper East Side, the West Side, universities exchanging seeds, exchanging commodities as far as bread, as far as other things that they've created. You can teach people skills to be self-sustainable and to also use their waste as a recyclable tool in order for the environment. I have to read this quote. I just read an article in the New York Times. This is according to the New York Times. Stats in NYC in reference to waste. A quarter of half of all food produced in, the U.S. goes uneaten. And I say this because in commercial farming, there's a lot of food family. If you do the research, that goes to waste. Sometimes it rots and it spoils and things like that, and so on and so forth. And the waste from this is an environmental hazard because it produces methane, which is a greenhouse gas. So if you have all of these commercial farmings, as you said, like, as large as South America, you can't possibly keep track of everything. And that waste contributes to the environmental methane gas production, poison, if you will. And if you do vertical farming, it gives you a handle on being able to monitor more closely what is going on to make sure that nothing gets waste and everything gets recycled.
Bingo. Yeah, that's the deal. In fact, if you go to the United States Department of Agriculture's website, they actually state that agriculture is the world's largest source of pollution. That's a hell of an admission from an agency whose job it is to promote agriculture. And then they say, but we can't help it because this is how farming has to occur. So if you plant your seeds and if you then fertilize your plots and then you throw on the herbicides, and when the crops start to grow, you have to use pesticides, and then you have an unfortunate event like we had last year. Remember all the floods that we had last year?
Mm-hmm.
Those floods at the wrong time, and of course they occurred at exactly the wrong time in June, they washed away all of those agricultural products. And where do you think they ended up? They ended up in the Mississippi River. The Mississippi River ended up in New Orleans, which is my hometown, and then into the Gulf of Mexico. And if you go to a map by the United States Department of the USGS, the United States Geologic Survey, they will show you a zone in the Gulf of Mexico called the Dead Zone. And that's created by agricultural runoff from the Mississippi-Missouri drainage basin. And that, we had our worst flood last year. If you go around the world, that's happening everywhere.
It is.
And that's the reason why the United States imports 80% of its seafood. We used to import almost none. And now our production has gone so low that we can't harvest any longer in terms of wild seafood. Take a look at where it comes from when you go to the local fish market, and you'll be appalled at some of the sites. I mean, not that I'm against this, but, if you have to fly in shrimp from Thailand and Vietnam and India just to meet the demand for shrimp, that's telling you something about the way the world works right now. And so that can be corrected instantly. If they can grow shrimp, so can we. If they can grow cantaloupes in the wintertime, so can we. But we just have to do it a different way. And so if we started to do this, by the way, on a larger scale than I'm suggesting is being done already, the rate of pollution into those rivers and then via into the ocean would start to slow down. And then eventually, if everybody catches on to this, it stops. And you can see every whale in the ocean jumping for joy. That's what's going to happen when that happens. One of my very good friends is Roger Payne, and maybe nobody knows who he is, but he's the one who first popularized the songs of whales. All right, the humpback whales, when they make their songs and when they're talking to each other over hundreds or thousands of miles of distance in the ocean, these are magnificent animals who were brought to their knees by whaling, and then they were put on the endangered list so that they're not hunting humpback whales any longer. They're beautiful, graceful animals. They're totally innocent. And the oceans are so polluted that you can do layers in their blubber and find out when lead got into their diet and when mercury got into their diet and when all kinds of other things, just like the annual rings on a tree. And you can see what's happening to these poor beasts that have no choice but to feed in nature, of course, because that's where they live. And we've put all of that material in there through our agricultural initiatives, mostly, and through, of course, coal power plants. But I don't want to talk about that issue. It's much too complicated.
Understood. Professor, I do have to mention this because I hear all kinds of things percolating.
Yeah.
And there are individuals who say, oh, this is planet Earth. Yes, we know. Mother Earth, she knows what she's doing. And, all of this hoopla about the environment. Mother Earth is built to recycle and so on and so forth. Oh, don't worry about it. And I just look at them like, are you
which planet was that for?
Yeah, I'm like, am I on the right planet or am I on planet Venus? They're like, oh, don't worry, that this is what the ocean does. It recycles itself, and it's been polluted for thousands of years and so on and so forth and blah, 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 blah. And it will eventually, heal itself. Not to worry. What do you say to people when they say stuff like that?
First of all, I laugh and I pat them on the head and say, as long as you don't read, I guess you're subjected to the whims of rumors, and this is a bad rumor. It was true in the old days when there were fewer people, much fewer people, that we could do anything we wanted and it didn't really matter because there was so much of it, and it was diluted out and it didn't have much of an effect. But when you've got 7 billion people using the size of South America just on land, and you're overfishing the oceans and depleting stock